What's up, everybody? This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply, and today's a bit of a special episode. No, I'm not going to be talking about tariffs or Trump or the market crashing and absolutely falling off a cliff right now. I'm going to be talking about things that I think are important to Bitcoin and the last thing standing between mass Bitcoin adoption. It's not a technical problem. It's not a problem about whether it will work or about the facts and the figures. It's a fundamentally human problem. In a talk that I gave at BitBlockBoom called How to Orange Pill Anyone, How Bitcoiners Win Friends and Influence People, I break down why in the first pandemic in America in Boston in 1721, people were willing to die of smallpox rather than accept a new paradigm and a new way of thinking. It's sort of like Bitcoin. People would rather die with something that they know, fiat, rather than live by having to change to something entirely new. If you've ever struggled to orange pill your family, your friends, your loved ones, people in your church, people in your community, business colleagues, then this presentation is for you. I suggest that you pull out a notepad, you take some notes, be ready to take some screenshots because it's power-packed. Thanks for riding along with me on this journey. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Let's go.
I want to introduce the one, the only, Dante Cook from Simply Bitcoin.
This is awesome to be here. My first major Bitcoin conference was Pacific Bitcoin 2022. And I remember that was when the world was collapsing, right? That was the FTX debacle. And a lot of you in this room, I met for the first time at this conference. There's a lot of you who, that was a very formative experience. Right now, the world's crashing around us. But if you came into the lobby of the Hilton, you wouldn't know that anything was going on. That's why I love Bitcoiners. Your resolve, your belief, what you stand for, your ability to stand firm in the midst of a changing world. But my talk today is going to be less about Bitcoin and the protocol and the development and strategic Bitcoin reserve and all the stuff that you guys probably listen to me talk about all the time. I'm going to talk about the human aspects of how ideas actually spread. So my talk is called How to Orange Pill Anyone. And we've all been there. We've all been to Thanksgiving. We've all been to a fraternity meetup. We've all been at a football game. We've all been at that spot where you're arguing about a conspiracy theory with your uncle, and then you just let him know, hey, 6 months now, come back and talk to me later. It'll be truth at that point. And the moment comes and somebody goes, hey, I just saw an article on CNBC about this Bitcoin thing. And this is when you launch in. This is when you go full-on sailor. Let me see if these slides are changing here. So you launch into your tirade. Once you see this thing, you can't unsee it. You know, your economic energy is being debased and devalued, and the energy of your economic energy is being diluted, and so you have to pour it into real estate and fine art and all of these other assets just to maintain your purchasing power. And Bitcoin is a network that's eating gold as a store of value and Visa as a payments network and currencies all together. The US dollar's going into the grave, and it's been the best performing asset 11 out of the last 14 years. How can you argue with that? And then the purchasing power of the dollar is going down 97% since 1913. Can you believe that? It's simple. There's an unlimited supply of fiat, and Bitcoin has this fixed supply. And how do you know that? Well, you got to know this math equation here. This guy named Anil put out a slide. Doesn't matter who he is, but it's a great slide. It talks about the halving and mathematical formulas and it getting cut in half every 4 years. Just trust me. And Saylor and Croesus, these guys, who's Croesus? I don't know. Doesn't matter. That we're going after a $900 trillion asset class, and you know, it's sort of like a protocol, right? You know, like HTTPS and TCP/IP, and you know, it's just the protocol for money. And Donald Trump even said at the Bitcoin conference in 2024, never sell your Bitcoin. We've got a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And then you've got, you go into your Larry Fink tirade. Well, BlackRock is the largest asset manager in the world. And they launched this product called iBit. And yeah, so you want to go back to your old life, this blue pill, or you want to take this orange pill and get on board? And then your uncle, your buddy raises their hand and said, hey, I thought I saw this interview coming up with this guy named Sam Bankman-Fried. he's sharing a cell with P. Diddy, and he's coming on at the Bitcoin conference. Isn't that the same thing as Bitcoin? And then you just put your hands on your head. You completely walk away. But what we have to understand and what we have to question at a fundamental level is this concept of orange pilling was based on a movie. That's not how change actually happens in the real world. If you've ever tried to implement meaningful change in the world, you realize that changing people is a lot harder than changing a protocol. And so what I want to talk about today is that we go on these tirades about Bitcoin and about Fiat, about Keynesian economics and all these things, and no one cares. I love you guys. My kids don't care, my wife doesn't care, and I talk about this stuff a lot. And Seth Godin had a really great quote. It's not the best idea, invention, or innovation that ends up becoming the winner. It's the best idea that spreads, that wins. And the graveyard is full of brilliant ideas that no one cared about. There's this guy named Geoffrey Moore. He created this framework for technology innovation and adoption. It's called the theory of technological innovation. But basically, there's these gaps where it talks about the kind of the techies, the nerds, like the early adopters. Gary just called us the patriots, right? And then you have the earlier adopters, and then you have the majority. Most of the people think that the gap between going from the early majority or the early minority to the early majority is a UX thing. Well, if we just had better Lightning UX, there'd be more people that adopted it. Oh, if there was more policy changes in terms of how Bitcoin is looked at from a regulatory standpoint. Oh, if the code had this opcode or that opcode, oh man, everybody would adopt Bitcoin. But fundamentally, the gap between the early minority and the early majority is a human problem and not a technical problem. So let me take you back to the summer of 1721. These are the ports in Boston. There was a ship that showed up from the Caribbean called the HMS Seahorse. And the Caribbeans were coming to do some trade, and that was a really big port. And what they brought with them was smallpox. So this turned out to be the largest outbreak of smallpox in Boston's history. And everybody was terrified at this point because they'd had smallpox outbreaks in 1677, 1689, and 1703 at this point. So everybody's freaking out. This is like COVID 4.0, right? Imagine that level of fear. 50% of the people in the city were infected, and 8% of everybody in the city died. And the only way, everyone thinks that Fauci, kind of made up his 6-foot science. It actually came from this time because the city leaders only knew how to deal with smallpox through quarantine. So they just removed the people, but that wasn't actually how it was spreading in the first place. But you had to put a 6-foot pole outside of your house and say that there's a person here that's infected. So the whole 6-foot thing, it was made up, but it was made up about a few hundred years earlier first. And so there's this guy named Cotton Mather. Okay, this dude was a genius. He's the earliest person ever accepted into Harvard at 11 years old. This guy came from a family of ministers and Puritans and a bunch of other people. He had a stuttering problem. So he wasn't going to go into the preaching business like the rest of his family, but he still needed to make a mark. And so he studied widely science, psychology, mathematics, and he ended up getting an idea from a slave that they'd owned in their family. His name is Onesimus. That comes from a slave actually in the Bible in Philippians. But Onesimus had actually learned about inoculation from his family back in Africa. Whenever you got sick in Africa, they gave you a little bit of the thing that was causing the disease and the spread, and eventually your body would become immune to it. And he said, hey, how about we try infecting people with smallpox? So clearly, nobody took him up on it. This is like telling everyone in your family, hey, dump all your fiat and live on strike cards and go all into Bitcoin, right? So this guy named Zab, Dr. Zab doing the dab, okay? Zab was the only one that took him up on it, and he's actually a really courageous person because he put his money where his mouth was. He actually inoculated his 2 sons, and his 2 slaves themselves. Imagine his 3-year-old son and 6-year-old son where he's testing out this new thing. They're almost on the brink of death because they're so sick, they're so tired. All of these things are happening, and he's scared to death. But they come out on the other side, to his surprise. And so they had this cohort, they ran this study. Of the 287 people that they inoculated through these means, only 6 died. This is 10x lower than the rate that was going on in Boston, the biggest outbreak and pandemic of the time. And so how do you think the people responded? It's been up 11 out of the last 14 years. I mean, this is actually a picture of the dude's house. They bombed Cotton Mather's house. They told him to get out of town. One of the major proponents spreading the propaganda was actually Ben Franklin himself. His brother ran a newspaper, James Franklin, called the New England Current, and he was actually under a pseudonymous name, right, as another writer and another person, like Satoshi Nakamoto, spreading fake news about smallpox and the science and everything that came out. We're going to talk a little bit about a hit piece or something that just came out recently a little later. Their mistake. They led with stats and not stories. They led with the facts and ignored the feelings. This is the fundamental problem that we need when we want to implement change. So let me go to a positive side, right? There's this guy, he's the greatest entrepreneur of all time. His net worth was $1 million at 23, $10 million at 24, and $100 million at 25. Now we know this guy to be Steve Jobs. And why did Steve Jobs become so successful when no one else in the computer business had experienced the same kind of success? Well, it's because he understood the art and science behind innovation, ideas, and breakthrough ideas and persuasion fundamentally. And so he had to convince America that they could take these large mainframes, things that took up an entire room, things that were super costly, you had to be technical to understand, and he wanted to make them personal. He wanted to bring the personal computer revolution to the world. And so in order to make a dent in the universe, he had to build a bridge. He had to create an analogy. And so he took this command line thing that was scary and didn't make sense and was a bunch of jargon for the average person, and he said, let me give you something that you understand. What about a desktop? What about a folder? What about a trash can? What about a document? What about copy and pasting? He made an analogy out of the computer screen in order to bridge the gap to a new group of people. He didn't tell us that, you guys are weird out there. He uplifted the crazy people, called them geniuses, and taught us to think different, right? He didn't talk about this new revolution coming in storage technology and information. He said, you can have 1,000 songs in your pocket. What do you think about that? So Bitcoin is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, sliced bread was the greatest thing since there was no other greater thing before sliced bread. So this guy named Otto Rudewetter created the sliced bread machine in 1910. That was revolutionary. But here's the thing, nobody cared. No one actually used his machine for almost 20 years until Wonder Bread came along. And they focused on the person with the problem, and they marketed bread differently. You know who they went to first? The women and the moms making sandwiches at home. That was their primary market to grow this idea of sliced bread. And so it grew so fast and became such a phenomenon that in World War II, the Secretary of Treasury, Claude Wickard, said that, hey, you guys love your bread, but you need to cut back on that bread so that we can have all of our rations we need for the war. You can't have those bread makers that use up too much metal. You can't do that. We need that back. The Housewives of America, not a TV show, revolted. Women were going insane. You will never put me back on the slavery of slicing my own bread. Like, I'm not going back. Literally, in less than 2 months, they banned it. And the most interesting thing about that whole thing is that we have this new thing called Bitcoin, which actually is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you wonder why innovations spread or don't spread, or why your neighbor doesn't get it, or why your mother-in-law doesn't get it, or your father-in-law, or your uncle, or your buddy. I was just talking to Mr. Walker, one of these guys in here, and he's been trying to orange pill one of his best friends, a former teammate. And the most interesting thing about it is we need to solve a human problem. And I'm super passionate about this problem. It's why my show on Simply Bitcoin's channel is called Bitcoin Simply. Because I want to fundamentally help us understand that the people that need Bitcoin the most aren't in this room. They're out there. They're somewhere else in the world. It's the next person. It's the other person that needs to unshackle themselves from the slavery of fiat. Because fiat is like a balloon, right? Its ability to float is only dictated by the environment or the climate that's in it. And when it gets cold, or when it gets constricted, or when policy changes or the wind changes, it either blows away in the wind or it lies dead flat on the ground with no value. And Bitcoin is like an air tank. It allows us to release our time, our talent, and our treasure when we want to, on the projects that we want to, that we find meaningful. And so for me, that's my church, that's my community, that's my city. Like I want to see Indianapolis be a shining hill, right? And I'm going to die with zero. I'm letting y'all know that now. You can try to wrench attack me. It won't matter, because you never seen a U-Haul attached to a hearse, right? You can't take it with you. So you can lay with your seed plate, but somebody else has access to your Bitcoin. And so I want to talk about a growth flywheel, why this is beneficial for you and for Bitcoin in practical terms. So anybody Jim Collins fans in here? Anybody like good to great, that sort of model and mantra? So he actually worked with a lot of companies to create these flywheels, these self-fulfilling loops that drive growth in their business. And so one of the first famous flywheels out there was Amazon. And so Amazon created this flywheel, the growth flywheel, that said, this is going to allow us to grow. If we have lower cost structure, we can have lower prices, which drives up the selection, which drives up the prices, which brings more sellers, which then brings more people onto the platform. So in Bitcoin terms, I'm calling this the Bitcoin flywheel. Our ability to grow our influence and our persuasion skills will actually, just not even in Bitcoin terms, allow you to grow your relationships and earn more fiat. You understanding these skills is not just good for Bitcoin, it's good for your career, it's good for your marriage, it's good for your relationships. It's all of these things that it will impact. And what that's gonna do is allow you to stack more sats. What's that gonna do? Drive the price up. What does that do? Bring more people to be more curious about Bitcoin, because the first orange pilling technology is number go up technology, right? Second is freedom go up technology. And then from there, as more people go into Bitcoin, more capital outside of Bitcoin flows into Bitcoin, which drives the price up. So this is not only beneficial for you personally, it's beneficial for Bitcoin. So how do we do it? Okay. There was a lot of terms and a lot of ways, and I poured over the science and the research of how do you actually make this sort of thing happen? How do I break this down in a way that's simple, a way for them to understand? And so what I did was I actually looked at Bitcoin. What can I learn from Bitcoin?
Before we go any further, let's take a moment to thank our sponsors. Our first sponsor, Ledn, the leader in Bitcoin-backed loans since 2018. They've issued over $9 billion worth of loans to 40,000 people and have never lost a single cent or sat of customer money. One of the reasons is ease of use and convenience. You can get your loan in less than 24 hours. The other thing is transparency. They were the first digital lender to provide a proof of reserves. And thirdly, it's because it's dead simple. If you want a $5,000 loan, you need to post $10,000 worth of collateral. And in times like these where the market price is crashing, it's good to know that you don't have to pay monthly interest payments, just a lump sum payment at the end of the term. You can also benefit from their beautiful dashboard where you can see where your loan to value ratio is at all times. Their team is friendly, transparent, and communicative to help you to have ease in the process of taking a loan out on your Bitcoin. Like Trump says, never sell your Bitcoin, but make sure that you're using products like Ledn responsibly. Learn more on your journey by going to learn.ledn.io/borrow to get started on your Bitcoin borrowing journey today. In times like these, when the market can be down several percentage points on one day and then back up miraculously a point or two on the next day, you understand how much our markets are manipulated and highly financialized, which is why we're always talking about taking self-custody of your Bitcoin. Become sovereign by taking self-custody of your Bitcoin and removing it from an exchange, but learn how to do it privately, safely, and securely. And with that, we've partnered with the Bitcoin Way, where members of their team will walk you through how to do that step by step. Self-custody is like an umbrella during the rain. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Protect your generational wealth the right way by going to thebitcoinway.com/simplybitcoin. That's thebitcoinway.com/simplybitcoin.
What terminology can I use from Bitcoin that would make sense to this crowd that would allow us to easily take the concepts of influence and persuasion and bring them to our families, our friends, and our communities? So I thought about this idea. I'm calling it the soft fork method. It's pretty fluid, but this is how Bitcoiners win friends and influence people. The soft fork method. And it's the art and science behind persuasion and also Bitcoin. How do we artfully maintain consensus? How do we artfully grow this network? And the whole idea is that we need to upgrade people's thinking without breaking their beliefs. Their beliefs change without you. You don't need to change their beliefs. You need to upgrade their thinking. They have to change their beliefs on their own. If anybody have kids in the room, it is impossible to make them to believe something that they've already come in to believe. You can only hope for your best and upgrade thinking, you know? And so this idea, hard fork versus soft fork in Bitcoin, there's two kinds of ways that you can upgrade the protocol fundamentally. There's a hard fork, which is backwards incompatible, and there is a soft fork, which is backwards compatible. All that means is the rules that used to apply before, Seb Bunny has his day 21 thing that's out there on Twitter. There's a pretty good analogy that he had in there, if you guys don't follow him, is that a hard fork is sort of like trying to speak to someone else in another language. It's incompatible. Whereas a soft fork is sort of like just adding new slang onto the English language, right? You might not understand the slang in particular, but that doesn't mean you have to throw away the English language altogether. That's a pretty helpful analogy. One of the other things about a hard fork is that it requires a break of trust and a break of relationship, and it actually causes an immediate switch, right? There's a time block or a block height at which you have to change to this new protocol or else you get left behind. And with soft fork, it allows nodes, miners, users, and people to signal their readiness that I am ready to change, and they upgrade over time, right? You can still operate the old software. Someone showed my phone earlier. Someone was amazed. I have a 4.5 SE with a lot of cracks in the screen. It's still got the button on the front of my iPhone. But I can still use the iPhone, even though it's an old version. That's the sort of analogy here. And a hard fork is more of an ETH mentality, right? We're going to move fast and we're going to break things, right? Have you ever heard of the ETH DAO? You ever heard of the proof of stake implementation or switchover? It's sort of this mindset of, hey, here's where we're going. If you're not going, you get left behind, okay? And a soft fork is fundamentally part of the Bitcoin thesis and the ethos, because one of the most beautiful things about Bitcoin is that it evolves through social consensus and not through force. That is how most meaningful change in the world happens. It doesn't happen through brute force. Like the African government tried to implement their own CBDC, right? Go look at the statistics and the numbers around that now, right? There's no implementation and no adoption. You know, and here's a couple of things I agree with. The financial system is broken. Fiat is trash. And if you don't buy Bitcoin, you'll be left behind. I agree with you. Terrible orange pilling strategy for your mother-in-law. Trying to hard fork people's beliefs doesn't work until times of desperation. So there are times that are necessary in Bitcoin where we might need to hard fork. There have been hard forks in the past, but that only comes when a time of desperation, right? So when the fiat absolutely collapses, you're going to see people try to rush into Bitcoin. But that's not because they wanted to, that's because they needed to, right? We want to bring people along with us. I don't want my uncle to have fun staying poor, right? I want them to adopt Bitcoin before they're needed to adopt Bitcoin. So SegWit, Bcash, ETHDAO, Taproot, they all teach us one thing: meaningful change, solving human problems is not just a technical thing. So here's the framework here fundamentally. I'll give this to you. There's two kinds of forks that you can do now that we're in the hard fork, soft fork dilemma. There's what's called a miner-activated soft fork, and then there's a user-activated soft fork. Okay, for the usage of this analogy or this acronym that you can take with you, I want to use this user-activated soft fork. One, because it puts the onus on the node or the individual. A user-activated soft fork is one that the nodes have to accept and adopt on their own. And fundamentally, our orange pilling in Bitcoin is going to happen person by person, bottom up, not top down, which is very different from a miner-activated soft fork. I know there's some ocean datum people in the world that would agree that, you know, the mining tactics may be a little bit manipulative and coercive, right, versus another method. So the slides will be available, I think, afterwards. So I just wanted to put this little visual here to help you guys understand that a little bit. And there's a little bit of difference between what I call persuasion versus manipulation, coercion, and concession. Concession is the lowest form of getting what people want. That's people coming together and getting less of what they actually wanted before they came in order to agree and move forward. Coercion is low IQ. That is, I have more power than you. I'm going to brute force and make you do something that you don't want to do. Manipulation is actually highly skilled, and it's very dangerous, right? That's actually looks a lot like persuasion. The difference is manipulation is you doing something for your needs that the person doesn't want to do, all right? Persuasion is getting them to upgrade their thinking for their own reasons and what they want to do. There's a fundamental difference between manipulation and persuasion. Understand first. So the psychological technique that you want to use here is what they call tactical empathy. Okay, the quote is, most of us start with their truth. Persuasion says, start with theirs. Okay? So people are 3 times more likely to be persuaded by someone who reflects their values back to them, even when they disagree. Okay, so there's this story, back to that smallpox story. Ben Franklin, in that time frame, he knew Cotton Mather pretty well. Those two were actually friends. They were buddies. I don't even think he knew that he was writing about him behind his back in the journal and in the magazine. But Ben Franklin fundamentally adopted inoculation and became one of the foremost proponents of it back in England and London and other places after it happened when his son, Frankie, died of smallpox. It's a really sad story. But one of the things that you have to understand is that Cotton Mather and those folks didn't take the time to understand the life stage. They didn't take time to understand the fundamental values and things that they believed first. And so their messaging was wrong. And what that ended up leading to was deaths that were unforced and other things. So it actually has real world implications. This book by Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference, is one of the best books that I've seen out there on how you can practice tactical empathy. It's empathy with intention. So there's a couple things that you can do when you're talking to people to make them understand that you're connecting with them, that they understand that you know why they feel the way that they do. First thing that you need to do is label their emotions. Now that doesn't mean condone their emotions. That doesn't mean promote their emotions. You can disagree with them. But say, it sounds like you feel like this. Another way is to validate their perspective. Wow, you think Bitcoin is a scam. You think it's exactly like Sam Bankman-Fried. On the outside, I would believe the same thing as you do. You have to meet them where they are, because once they know that you understand them, then you're allowed to change their mind. But you cannot change someone's mind if you don't go inside of their mind. Okay? Next one, you have to align with their identity. Okay, we've got Mr. Schiff on here. The persuasion technique is called identity framing, okay? So people don't believe what's true, they believe with what fits who they are, okay? So when they walk into the room, you're not gonna do the change of water in time of just smoothing out these hard edges that have been formed over their lifetime. Here's a stat. 88% of people double down on a belief if it aligns with their identity, even when there's contradictory evidence, okay? So Peter Schiff denied Bitcoin at $1. And he continued to do that on 50 other interviews between then and today. And he has this quote of saying, do I wish I had thrown $50,000 or $100,000 into Bitcoin? Yes, because I would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars and there's no income tax in Puerto Rico. But he had to fundamentally align with his belief and his gold fund in order to save face. So there's a lot of psychological things in here, cognitive bias, selection bias, all of these things that were actually holding him back. There's a great book on this called by Robert Cialdini called Influence, okay? And we're not persuaded by people, we're easily persuaded by people who are like us, so people who are likable, people who are actually in a crowd of other people that believe this thing. So don't just talk about you believing Bitcoin, talk about your meetup. Talk about thousands of other people who flew down to Dallas, Texas when it was raining, away from their wife and kids in order to come talk about this thing. While the market was crashing and down 5% yesterday, Bitcoin was the life raft out of the calamity, right? And then you want to be consistent. If you're inconsistent with your beliefs, if you're inconsistent with your actions or behaviors, the people who are looking at you are less likely to follow the thing that you're following. So if you start to sell when the market gets a little bit, weary or shaky, they're not going to have full confidence and trust that you actually believe in this thing. So be consistent with your actions. Okay, stories, not stats, okay? This is called the narrative transformation theory. The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. So the stories activate 7 parts of your brain when stats only activate 2, right? It's so powerful and so effective, right? That there's this guy named Michael Saylor who had a company that had $500,000 in cash, was growing 2% a year, that is now a $100 billion company, right? That is one of the most successful Wall Street turnarounds in history. And he did selling stories, right? Why do we all follow Michael Saylor? It's because of his presentations. It's because of his analogies. It's because he fundamentally doesn't talk about the Bitcoin protocol at all. I think is why he's captivated Wall Street. I think that's why he's captivated us. There's something to learn there. A great book by Jonathan Gottschall called The Storytelling Animal. We believe in stories so much that we even think about them when we go to sleep at night, even when we're not consciously awake. So, a couple things with stories. Start with the stakes, not with the stats. Make the person in the story the hero. You are not the hero, you are the guide. You are Yoda, they are Luke Skywalker, okay? And then deliver the aha softly. I think people want to, in Bitcoin, I say, I orange-pilled my. Be the kind of influencer and persuasive person that doesn't need the credit for someone else making a change in their beliefs about Bitcoin. You don't have to deliver the punchline. Let them come to the conclusion of the punchline themselves. And when you find out that they actually adopted Bitcoin, that's probably a better result than you trying to get them to orange pill on the spot. Facilitate ownership. Okay, this is called the self-attribution technique or the IKEA effect, that we like things more when we build them ourselves than when we receive them. This is the whole IKEA thing. This is why you haven't got rid of that cheap cabinet in your house that took you 9 hours to put together with those fake screws that they manufactured themselves. You've got those little orange boxes with the cheap hammers in your house. Everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about. Don't act like y'all buy from Restoration Hardware. All right? So this thing is called the facilitate ownership. And this is actually the foundation of the Constitution. Why is the US Constitution the most heavily believed and defended document in the world? We argue about judges and politicians and who's being put in office. Well, it's because when the founders brought forward the Constitution, they didn't just say, here it is. What did they let the states do? Ratify it. Right? Philly, my Eagles, home state, Birds fans, where you at? There we go. We got to stand up everywhere we are. Philadelphia took 1.5 years to ratify the Constitution. But I bet you when they went to go present the final document, what did they do? They defended it. We defend the beliefs that we take ownership of. So one of the things that you can do to subtly orange pill people is you can get them in a multi-sig. Use a solution like Thea or Unchained or other things. Allow them to be a key holder. Allow them to be another person on the other side of the vault. Give them some sats. Hey, tell them I started a portfolio for you. Send a hardware to your family or friend's house for Christmas or other things and say, hey, here's 12 words. You don't need to know what they are, but here's an address. Take a look, and there's some Bitcoin in there for you. Once they receive ownership of the idea of Bitcoin, they are more likely to move forward in their journey about Bitcoin. All right. There's a book called Drive by Daniel Pink. Mastery, autonomy, purpose are the 3 things that pretty much drive how people get or do the most and are the most productive. So lastly, Michael Saylor has a great interview. This is with What Bitcoin Did with Peter McCormack, I think a couple years ago. But he said, stay cheerful. Be constructive, upgrade the world. And I think one of the things that we need to think about with Bitcoin is not changing people. We're not there to defeat the person that we're trying to persuade or get into Bitcoin. We're trying to move them towards a future that we believe is better for them and hopefully will be better for them in the future. These are people that you love, people that you care about, and people that you want on your team eventually. So don't burn the bridge, don't burn the relationship. Soft fork them instead of trying to hard fork their beliefs. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the video. And if you have any interest in the book that I talked about during my presentation, please do make a comment in the video. The last few weeks, the Simply Bitcoin team has had a blast hanging out with some of our fans that ride with us every single day at the Mining Disrupt Conference and BitBlockBoom in Dallas, Texas. But we're super excited to get to hang with you again in about a month at the Bitcoin Magazine Conference from May 27th through May 29th in Las Vegas. Bitcoin Magazine had about 25,000 people in Miami a few years ago, and this conference is expected to be even bigger, maybe 30,000? Come join us and people from all across the world at the world's largest Bitcoin conference, where you can stay up to date on the tectonic shifts that are happening in the world of Bitcoin. Last year was when Donald Trump announced a strategic Bitcoin reserve. What will we see this year? Go to b.tc/conference 2025 and use the promo code SIMPLY for 10% off your ticket. We can't wait to see you there. And we might have some merch too. Who knows? This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Happy stacking.